The Royal Flying Corps was suffering devastating losses over the Western Front. British pilots were flying outdated aircraft against superior German Albatros D fighters. In just 1 month, more than 300 airmen were lost. The average pilot's life expectancy was only 17 and a half flying hours. In late February 1917, after the brutal battles of the previous year, the exhausted German army withdrew to the Hindenburg Line, a shorter, stronger defensive front that was easier to hold and required fewer troops. As British patrols advanced after the retreating German forces, they were halted by difficult terrain and heavy defenses. This line quickly became the focus of Allied operations throughout 1917. French Commander-in-Chief Robert Nivelle promised to break the stalemate with one massive offensive. His plan called for French forces to attack along the Aisne front, while the British and Canadians would strike further north at Arras, Vimy Ridge, and Bullecourt. Air superiority was considered essential to the success of the offensive. General Hugh Trenchard, commander of the Royal Flying Corps, strongly believed in the aggressive use of air power. He wanted his pilots over enemy lines at all times, not sitting idle behind the front. When the Battle of Arras began, more than 2.5 million shells were fired in the preliminary bombardment, 1 million more than at the Battle of the Somme. As the troops went over the top, they were supported by a creeping barrage of artillery, and the initial results were impressive. The Royal Flying Corps was tasked with close air support, reconnaissance, bombing operations, and artillery spotting, but in the spring of 1917, the RFC's aircraft were starting to show their age. Since late 1916, the Germans had held the upper hand in the air with the Albatros D series, giving German pilots a clear advantage over most contemporary British types. Reconnaissance and bomber crews were still flying slow, vulnerable machines, such as the BE-2, RE-8, and FE-2B, that were easy prey for the faster twin-gun Albatros D series. Fighter cover was provided by Nieuport 17s and Sopwith Pups, but these could not match the German fighters in either speed or firepower. Despite this, reconnaissance flights continued daily. Pilots and observers carried out artillery spotting, trench photography, and bombing runs, often at low altitude and slow speed directly over enemy lines. It was dangerous work at the best of times, and the absence of parachutes for British aircrew made survival even less likely. Unfortunately, things were only going to get worse for the pilots of the RFC. In March, a new German fighter squadron arrived at the front, Jagdstaffel 11, commanded by a young cavalry officer named Manfred von Richthofen, the man who would become known to history as the Red Baron. Under Richthofen's leadership, Jasta 11 became one of the most feared units on the Western Front, with some sources crediting them with over a third of all British losses during April 1917. German infantry officer Ernst Jünger later recalled, "During these days there was a whole series of dogfights which almost invariably ended in defeat for the British, since it was Richthofen's squadron they were up against. Often 5 or 6 planes in succession would be chased away or shot down in flames. These heavy casualties created a desperate shortage of RFC pilots. As a result, training programs were shortened and new recruits were sent to the front with only the bare minimum of flying experience. Many of these young men lasted only a day or two in combat before being killed." In contrast, German training and unit organization emphasized experienced leaders and tactical cohesion. After suffering their own setbacks in 1916, the Germans had reorganized their air service, forming dedicated fighter squadrons known as Jagdstaffeln, Jastas. These were led by highly experienced combat pilots, many veterans of the early air war, and they were equipped with the excellent Albatros D3 fighter, although in far fewer numbers than the RFC. This numerical inferiority and defensive posture actually worked to their advantage. They fought almost entirely over their own territory, giving them greater tactical freedom to choose when and where to engage the enemy. And if shot down and lucky enough to survive, they landed behind friendly lines rather than falling into captivity. By the end of April, the RFC had lost 245 aircraft, with 211 aircrew killed or missing and 108 captured. The German air service, by comparison, had lost just 66 aircraft. This period became known as Bloody April and marked the lowest point of the war for the Royal Flying Corps. Yet even with these terrible losses, the German Air Force was unable to prevent the Royal Flying Corps from fulfilling its vital role. Throughout the Arras offensive, RFC squadrons continued to operate relentlessly, capturing aerial photographs, directing artillery fire, and carrying out bombing missions deep behind enemy lines. Above all, it was the artillery observation that proved indispensable, guiding British guns with precision and allowing them to maintain dominance throughout the battle. All of this resulted in a British advance of 3.5 miles, which does not sound like much, but it was actually the furthest advance since trench warfare had begun in 1914. But the momentum could not be sustained. German reinforcements arrived, and once again the fighting bogged down into the familiar nightmare of stalemate trench warfare. By mid-May, the entire offensive was called off. The devastating losses of Bloody April exposed how vulnerable Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service aircraft had become to German fighters. It was clear that Britain urgently needed a new generation of aircraft with greater speed, maneuverability, and heavier armament. Back in England the previous year at the Sopwith factory in Kingston-upon-Thames, Chief Designer Herbert Smith had begun work on a new scout, the Sopwith F1. It featured a conventional design for its time, with a wire-braced wooden box girder fuselage, an aluminium engine cowling, plywood panels around the cockpit, and fabric-covered wings, tail, and rear fuselage. It was a direct development of his earlier and highly successful Sopwith Pup. Although the two aircraft looked similar, their flying characteristics were completely different. The Pup was lightweight, forgiving, and easy to fly. British ace James McCudden described it as a remarkably fine machine for general all-round flying. It was so extremely light and well-surfaced that after a little practice, one could almost land it on a tennis court. The new F1, however, was a very different beast. It was bigger, heavier, and far more difficult to fly. The Big Pup, as pilots initially nicknamed it, was also more heavily armed, being the first British-designed scout to enter service with twin Vickers machine guns mounted directly in front of the cockpit. A synchronization gear allowed the guns to fire through the spinning propeller without striking the blades. To prevent the guns freezing at altitude, a metal fairing was fitted over their breeches. This humped fairing gave the aircraft its famous nickname, the Camel. On 22 December 1916, Australian aviation pioneer Harry Hawker flew the first prototype from Brooklands in Weybridge, Surrey, then a major hub of British aviation development, and today a superb museum. Unlike the Pup's gentle and forgiving nature, the Sopwith Camel was sensitive on the controls and notoriously difficult to fly. The bulk of its weight, engine, fuel tank, and guns, was concentrated in the forward fuselage. The powerful gyroscopic effect of the rotary engine produced asymmetric handling. Left turns were sluggish and tended to raise the nose, while right turns could be much tighter with a marked nose drop. Consequently, some pilots preferred to make a sweeping 270-degree right turn rather than a simple 90-degree left turn. It had a top speed of 113 miles per hour, a range of 300 miles, and a service ceiling of 19,000 feet. When it entered service, the Camel quickly gained a grim reputation among trainee pilots. Its awkward center of gravity, sensitive controls, and difficult ground handling caused many crashes on takeoff. Once airborne, if the aircraft stalled, it would drop into a violent spin that was hard to recover from. For inexperienced pilots, the Camel could be deadly. Lieutenant Colonel Strange of the Central Flying School recalled in Recollections of an Airman, "In spite of the care we took, Camels continually spun down out of control when flown by pupils on their first solos." Eventually, with the help of Lieutenant Morgan, who ran the workshops, Strange removed the main fuel tank from several Camels and replaced it with a smaller one, allowing dual controls to be fitted. These conversions and the introduction of dual instruction helped reduce the appalling accident rate during early training. Yet it was precisely these quirks, its instability and sensitive controls, that made the Camel such a formidable dogfighter. Pilots joked that it offered the choice of a wooden cross, a red cross, or the Victoria Cross. As aviation historian Robert Jackson observed, in the hands of a novice, it displayed vicious characteristics that could kill its pilot. But under the firm control of a skilled aviator who knew how to turn its vices into advantages, it was one of the most superb fighting machines ever built, as would be proved when the Sopwith Camel finally reached the Western Front in June 1917. Number 4. Squadron of the Royal Naval Air Service, based at Bray Dunes just north of Dunkirk, was the first unit to operate the Sopwith Camel, and the squadron wasted no time putting the new aircraft to use. On the evening of the 5th of June, Flight Commander Alexander M. Shook recorded the first official combat victories in a Camel. While patrolling off the Belgian coast, he encountered about 15 enemy aircraft and shot down a German Albatros D-3 and a two-seater. These victories made Shook an ace, having previously claimed 3 kills in April and May while flying a Sopwith Pup. There are reports of an earlier engagement on the 4th of June near Newport where Shook attacked another two-seater, although no official record of that fight exists. On 13th June, No. 70 Squadron became the first Royal Flying Corps unit to receive the Sopwith Camel, reaching full operational strength by early July. Based just behind the front near Arras, the squadron saw its first combat on the evening of 27th June. Captain Clive Collett, flying Camel B-3756, downed an Albatross D-Fee over Epinoy, the first confirmed victory in a Camel by an RFC pilot. By September, the New Zealand-born Collett had amassed 11 aerial victories. On 12th July, just 15 days after Collett's success, Captain Webb also scored a victory against an Albatross reconnaissance aircraft flying the same machine, B-3756. On the evening of July 17th, Captain Webb was leading a patrol of Sopwith camels over Belgium when they encountered Jasta 11, the famed German fighter squadron. In the ensuing fight, Collett and his fellow pilots exploited the camels' superior agility and firepower, downing 5 enemy aircraft and wounding another pilot. The encounter marked a dramatic reversal of fortune for the RFC, in stark contrast to the devastating losses suffered just months earlier during Bloody April. Experienced pilots were impressed with Sopwith's new fighter. Lieutenant Leonard H. Rochford of No. 3 Naval Squadron remarked, "By the middle of July, the Camel had completely replaced our pups. Although the pup was a delightful little airplane to fly, the Camel was undoubtedly a much superior fighting machine." From September 1917 to September 1918, Wing Commander William George Barker, Canada's most highly decorated serviceman, scored 46 victories against enemy aircraft and balloons. His Camel, serial B6313, is the single aircraft with the highest number of confirmed kills in the First World War. Music. By February 1918, 13 squadrons were primarily equipped with Camels. Alongside the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A and the French SPAD-S13, these aircraft played a crucial role in helping the Allies regain air superiority, for the time being at least. Although the Sopwith Camel is best remembered for its exploits over the Western Front, it also played a vital role in defending Britain itself. Beginning in July 1917, the Royal Naval Air Service deployed Camels from Eastchurch and Manston to intercept German bombers, most notably Gothas, during daylight raids. The increasing frequency of these attacks forced the Royal Flying Corps to divert several Camel squadrons originally destined for France to home defense duties. By March 1918, the Camel had become a mainstay of Britain's defensive squadrons. As the Germans shifted to night bombing, the Sopwith Camel proved adaptable for night operations. Aircraft assigned to home defense squadrons were quickly fitted with navigation lights, enabling them to operate as night fighters. A select number of Camels received more extensive modifications. Their synchronized Vickers guns were replaced with over-wing Lewis guns. This preserved the pilot's night vision by moving muzzle flashes above the line of sight and allowed the use of powerful incendiary ammunition that was unsafe with synchronized Vickers guns. Throughout 1918, Camels engaged incoming raiders with growing success. During the last major air raid on Britain on the night of 20th to 21st May 1918, a combined force of 74 Camels and SE-5s intercepted 28 German Gotha and Zeppelin Staaken bombers. 3 enemy aircraft were destroyed in air combat, 2 more by anti-aircraft fire, and another lost to engine failure, the heaviest losses ever suffered by German bombers in a single night's operation over England. The Sopwith 2 F.1 Camel, often called the ship's Camel, was a specialized naval variant of the standard F.1 designed for shipboard operations by the Royal Naval Air Service. Developed to meet the demands of naval aviation, the 2 F.1 featured several key modifications. It had a shorter wingspan and a detachable rear fuselage for easier handling and storage aboard ships. They were usually fitted with Bentley BR-1 rotary engines, which gave reliable performance in maritime conditions. On many aircraft, one of the 2 synchronized Vickers guns was replaced with an over-wing Lewis gun, allowing the use of incendiary ammunition essential for engaging Zeppelins. These aircraft were launched from platforms mounted on the turrets of major warships and from some of the earliest aircraft carriers, most notably HMS Furious. Furious played a pioneering role in naval aviation, launching Camels directly from her deck to intercept enemy airships and conduct reconnaissance. The Tu F.1 Camel was also launched from aircraft lighters, specially modified barges towed at high speed by destroyers. These lighters allowed scouts to be deployed far forward to intercept German bombers and Zeppelins well beyond the reach of shore-based airfields. Despite all its successes, by mid-1918, the rapid pace of technological advance had left the Camel increasingly outclassed as a frontline fighter. The introduction of the formidable Fokker D-7 exposed the Camel's limitations. At high altitude and in sustained climbs, the Camel could not match the performance of the latest German fighters. Nevertheless, the Camel's agility and robust construction kept it valuable in other roles. As the air war evolved, the aircraft was reassigned to ground attack missions where it proved extremely effective. Armed with Cooper bombs and twin synchronized Vickers guns, Camels strafed enemy trenches, supply lines, and troop concentrations. These low-level attacks inflicted heavy damage on German forces, but at great risk to the pilots who faced intense ground fire and the constant danger of mechanical failure in high-speed dives. The new Sopwith Snipe, delayed by development problems and wartime production bottlenecks, did not reach the front in significant numbers until the final months of the war. As a result, the Camel remained in widespread service until the armistice in November 1918 and beyond. The Royal Air Force officially retired the Sopwith Camel in 1920, ending its frontline service in Britain. However, the aircraft's legacy continued well into the 1920s as several nations kept it flying in both combat and training roles. Its notoriously challenging handling ultimately became its greatest strength. While unforgiving and often fatal to inexperienced pilots, it richly rewarded skill and precision with outstanding combat performance. In the hands of a seasoned aviator, the Camel was lethal, turning many of its pilots into aces. With its distinctive silhouette and extraordinary combat record, the Camel became one of the most iconic aircraft of the First World War. Credited with 1,294 confirmed aerial victories, it remains the most successful Allied fighter of the conflict.